What's good, people? It's your boy Fresh with the Android Authority, and this is our review of the BLU Pure XR. In the ever-changing landscape of mobile tech, the line between mid-range and flagship phones is blurrier than ever. With emerging companies aiming to produce the next flagship killer, some are getting closer and closer to hitting the mark. The BLU Pure XR is a mid to high-end offering from BLU products, second only to the Pure XL. Many of these phones are making their way to the States and offer more than decent specs at a reduced cost. Now that we're getting back to school, the perfect target audience could be parents looking to get their kids reliable phones without breaking the bank. This phone comes in at $299, which is still a decent amount of money to part with, but far less than the front runners in the market. Now let's talk about what you get for $299. First and foremost, you get a 1080p HD Super AMOLED display with great brightness and viewing angles. Also, you get a 16 megapixel camera with laser autofocus, a 2.0 gigahertz octa-core processor, 4 gigs of RAM, USB Type-C, 64 gig internal storage, and also a fingerprint scanner, which is an impressive lineup of specs for a phone of this price. Now, of course, in addition to the phone inside the box, you get your quick guide and setup manual. Also, you get a complimentary screen protector, which of course is good to avoid scratches. Also, you get a starter case, which is also good to give you some type of protection until you get a better case, a SIM tool to pop your SIM card out, and also a USB to USB-C adapter, your wall brick, of course, the USB-C cable, earbuds, and earbud tips. And now let's focus in on the camera, and considering that this phone is half the price of most flagship devices out there, I honestly believe that this phone's camera would be subpar. Coming in at 16 megapixels under the right conditions, this camera can produce sharp images with realistic color accuracy. But there are some glaring issues. When trying to adjust the focal point, I noticed that the center of the image would always remain sharp and the edges would be blurred. I also must admit that I'm not a fan of the HDR mode on this phone. It tends to blow out your highlights and leave your colors washed out. And please do not use the zoom on this camera. You end up with horrible photos that lack definition and detail and just look really bad and over sharpened. Also, to be fair, I'm not a fan of using digital zoom on any phone camera, but the BLU XR definitely struggles in this area. The video quality also leaves a lot to be desired. I noticed that there is noticeable shift in ISO and exposure when going from dark to highlighted areas, and the image stabilization isn't very dependable, and at best you can record at 1080p 30 frames per second, which isn't the end of the world, but worth noting. In regards to low light camera performance, I once again prefer the HDR mode off, although there are still visible artifacts in both samples. When HDR is off, it looks a bit more natural and realistic in my opinion. It is also important to note the discoloration in the shadowy areas when HDR is on. Now let's take a look under the hood and discuss how the BLU Pure XR performs. As mentioned earlier, this phone is equipped with an octa-core MediaTek Helio P10 chip. Now when you hear octa-core, your ears may perk up, but it can be misleading. When running Antutu Benchmark and Geekybench, results were much worse than I expected, coming in ranked 30th with a score of 50,789, surprisingly ranking lower than older phones like the iPhone 5S and Nexus 6. I am happy to report that those scores haven't translated over to the day-to-day use. The overall UI is responsive and quick to load applications or animations, and when gaming I did notice the occasional frame drop or delay in graphic textures loading, but nothing that was unbearable or a deal breaker. Now let's discuss battery life. When using this phone, you can expect 3 to 3.5 hours of screen on time, which is pretty average. The real highlight here is the standby time of 4 days, 20 hours, and 5 minutes, with 14% battery remaining. Also, when testing this phone, I used it on and off Wi-Fi with screen brightness maxed out, GPS on, and Bluetooth on. All in all, this phone will last you a solid day with moderate usage, which for me is an occasional game, YouTube videos, streaming music, and texting. Now let's summarize things and recap with the good and the bad. First, the full metal premium design with 7000 series aluminum and glass front. This phone looks beautiful. Second, the speakers. When watching videos, I was surprised by how loud the phone can get, maintaining clarity without distortion, providing a valid sense of immersion when consuming media. Third, it has a decent camera for the price. Although the camera has its areas of opportunity, as mentioned earlier, under the right conditions, you can produce a great picture. Next, this phone offers a smooth UI that strays away from conventional Android by revealing the settings toggle when swiping up from the bottom instead of the top. Also, the omission of the app drawer took some getting used to, but after a while I forgot it was missing. Going from screen to screen and in and out of folders had smooth transition without lag, and the ability to change themes and adjust color schemes with Chameleon is a nice touch. Also, this phone has a fast fingerprint scanner. which was very quick to respond no matter the orientation of my finger. And lastly, 3D Touch was one feature that I stumbled upon when using this phone and was shocked by its inclusion. It's the first Android phone that I've seen adopt 3D Touch using finger pressure. And now for the bad. Poor benchmarks in comparison to other phones. The BLU Pure XR was unimpressive but expected, although when using the phone for general use it felt fine, so take those tests with a grain of salt. And of course the camera, as mentioned earlier, you can take a great picture under the right conditions, but it does have poor HDR, digital zoom, and low light performance. And lastly, poor call quality. When making calls, the voices did sound garbled, almost as if the other person had a cold. Now for my final verdict. Understanding the target audience for this product, it's a solid offering giving the consumer a big bang for their buck, to be honest. My list of cons was short for a reason. It's because this is a great phone for the price and leaves a little to be desired. Most people I know knew nothing about BLU products, but when I let them play with the phone, their surprise and satisfaction with the design and performance was consistent. At the end of the day, this phone isn't for everyone, nor is it meant to be, and I have no problem recommending it. And that concludes this review. Thank you guys for watching, and stay tuned into Android Authority because of course we are your #1 source for all things Android.